This St. Patrick's Day weekend, the Portland Bureau of Transportation wants to make it a lot easier for you to celebrate safely. From March 14th through the 17th, they're offering discounted taxi and rideshare service rides. So if you're heading to the Cal's Portland Irish Festival on the waterfront, ask any employee and they'll give you a taxi coupon good for up to $20 off one ride. You can also hit up PBOT's website for coupon codes to get $10 off one Lyft or Uber ride within our city limits. Remember, it's never safe to drive impaired, so either let TriMet do the driving or let PBOT help you pay for your ride home. More details at portland.gov/transportation. Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about Oregon's voter-approved gun control measure getting one step closer to enforcement, the mayor's executive decision to expand the role of Portland street response, and a couple of audacious headlines that involve neighbors trying to cancel children's dance parties and the possible retaliation a kayaker faced after successfully suing to open Oswego Lake to the public. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are Oregonian reporter Zane Sparling and our very own executive producer, John Notarianni. It's Friday, March 14th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome, everyone, to the Friday News Roundup. Zane, John, thank you for hanging out with me this morning.
Hey, good morning, Claudia.
Yeehaw.
Zane is calling in from Austin because he's having a South by Southwest adventure.
With my dad.
Yes, so cute. Okay, but I'm also a little disappointed that you're not in a bathtub, I'll be honest. I was hoping from here on out, all news from you would be delivered in a bathtub.
You know, I've gotten so many requests.
Splish splash, I'm taking a bath in the waters of Oswego Lake.
John, you had that ready to go. I love it. Oh my God.
Like the reaction noise now.
In all honesty, I loved it so much, I sent it to like the entire team and I was like, look at this legend. Anyhow, just know, we're not making fun of you.
We should explain that's from an Instagram video or a TikTok video that Zane produced on one of the stories that we will talk about later in the show.
And Claudia, it's good to hear that you're not making fun of me because I was deadly serious during the production of that video that I said while wearing a suit in my bathtub. So thank you.
Of course.
If you haven't watched it, I am fully clothed, so you will be safe from harm.
Well, for those of you new to the show, today is the day we break down some of the biggest local stories of the week with some of the best and brightest journalists in town, fully clothed. But before we jump into the news, I usually ask an opening question so our listeners can get to know just our guests a little better. And today's opening question is actually related to Tuesday's episode where we talked with local comedian Jay Fluelling about some of Portlanders' most toxic traits, which we categorized as bad behavior or habits that feel just very specific to the people living in Portland. And he brought us tape from some of our city's funniest people, and I think we covered some very important ground. So my question for you both, with a tweak for John, is what is your most Portland toxic trait? John, your tweak, since you already shared yours on the show, is just to give us a toxic trait you've seen out in the wild that irks you the most. So you get to cast stones now that you've repented.
Oh, I've got more toxic traits to offer. Yeah. This morning was recycling day for me. Mm-hmm. And I think another of my toxic trait is like just sort of relying on the kindness of Portland recyclers to take a little bit more than is necessarily fair. Like I recently moved into this new house and I was like, I'm sure they'll be fine if I just sort of pile these cardboard boxes next to my recycling bin and they'll take them. And sure enough, this morning I woke up and the kind folks who handle my recycling had also taken the recycling and sort of strewn next to my bin this morning.
They might charge you for it, just FYI. Like, you might get, like, a little charge, but, yeah, they'll take it,
Fair
right?
enough, yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Zane?
I'm just going to play the reverse Uno card and say that my toxic Portland trait is being the recycling police. I don't know if you've ever...
I was going to say that, too. I was like, actually, I don't think that's a Portland toxic trait, John. The reverse is the Portland toxic trait. Go on, Zane.
I mean, it's so hard because I'm sure we've all seen the news stories that say, like, China stopped taking our trash and now it just gets dumped in the ocean. And it's really hard to know anymore. Like, is this actually doing anything right now? Like, I'm the kind of guy who's still cutting out the plastic see-through label on my mail. I'm like, this part isn't paper, you know? And it's like, and it doesn't matter that the little sheet that the city distributes says you can put the plastic label in along with the paper. Like, I refuse to do it. And I also enjoy, especially when I lived with like 5 other people, I love just digging through that bin, you know, and finding out like which one of my roommates had
Oh my God.
dumped the like somewhat greasy, it claims it's paper but it has food waste on it. That was so much fun for me. I miss it.
I've gotten on full-on arguments with past roommates about the plastic top of like soy milk. You know what I mean? Like the little plastic top, you have to rip it off and throw it away. And I just would literally be like, how hard is this, you guys? How hard is this? As I'm sitting there just doing it to everyone.
Before I get angry emails, I do have good etiquette on what I actually put into the bin. For the record, all right? I'm not trying to pass off my bottle caps. I'm not that guy.
Hey, look, he's not saying that, all right?
I'm not saying that.
Well, you guys, thank you both for your answers. On to the news of the week. Zane, what did you bring us?
So I have a major court ruling out of the Oregon Appeals Court. This was reported by my colleague Maxine Bernstein since I'm on vacation this week, but it's a real bombshell, not entirely unexpected. What the appeals court did was on Wednesday, they said that Measure 114, which was that gun control measure that the voters approved a few years ago, they said that it is good to go. This measure has been on hold for over 2 years, and it has a number of big changes for how firearms access is going to work in Oregon. Number one, I think biggest is you're going to need a permit now for a gun. It's going to end that loophole on background checks, because currently in Oregon, sometimes you can get a gun by starting your background check, but not completing it, right? So in practice, it means you can buy a gun and walk out with that gun in the same transaction, right? Because the background check has begun, but it's not over. So now we're looking at least a 30-day waiting period to actually possess a firearm going forward. I think a provision that gets more attention, which is about how large your magazine can be, how many bullets can be in that mag, quote unquote, right? And so now it's going to be restricted to 9. And of course, anyone who's gone to a gun range or used a gun knows that there are commonly sold larger capacity magazines that are now going to be restricted in Oregon, statewide.
Yeah, I feel like we had a couple years where we passed a number of like really big voter approved measures that we've now been in the process of untangling and undoing and fuss over. Obviously, Measure 110, the drug decriminalization rule, was the biggest one. It's a relief to like finally see some clarity on this one that has been caught up in the courts for years and years, although I am skeptical that this is the end of the line. I'm cautious that there might be more wrangling over this law coming up over the next year or so.
Yeah, I can't imagine that the other side's like, oh, okay, well, thank you. Good to know. It's all above board. Great. We'll stop complaining about it.
Yeah.
I just remember this was the law that cleared out the legislative session. This is like when all of the Republicans would leave and go to Denny's or wherever they were going. Do you remember? And I think that the Oregon Democratic Party just decided, like, you know what? Screw it. And they like let it go so they could go ahead and just finish their session. So if you're new to town, this was a big one. It also just seems like the majority of it is like, hey, get a background check. You should maybe have a permit. And also, like, can we not use those like never ending magazines? Like, I feel like that's just common sense, but I don't know.
This was an interesting one from a legal perspective, just because the guns rights folks who challenged this, they kind of went judge shopping, right? They filed their lawsuit not in Multnomah County or the metro area. They filed the lawsuit in Harney County, which has about 10,000 people. It's in Eastern Oregon, right? So there's not very many judges out there in Harney County. And it wasn't necessarily that unexpected that for 2 years, the judge who was overseeing the case, the lawsuit, was totally willing to put a pause or a stay on all enforcement of Measure 114, right? So the state jumped up and down in Harney County Court trying to get this judge to say, let us, we can have a legal argument, a legal battle, but let's have enforcement begin now. And Harney County said no, since November 2022, essentially, when this passed with just a sliver of a majority. I mean, voters approved this by 50.7%. That is a tiny, tiny amount. It is a majority, but very small.
Yeah, and in Maxine's reporting, she points out that the attorney who's representing the gun rights advocates is not laying down. He's like already gearing up to petition the Oregon Supreme Court, right? Like, they have 35 days to challenge this up to the Supreme Court of Oregon. Do you have a read, Zane, on what that process looks like? Like, what happens at that point?
Yeah, so I think it's highly unlikely that the Oregon Supreme Court is going to reverse the appeals court decision, just given what we know about who appoints Oregon Supreme Court justices and who appoints Oregon appeals court justices. Spoiler alert, it's Democrats, right? That's the same political party that, supported this measure. And I can't see the future. I do hope, if anything good comes out of this, it'll be decreasing suicides and homicides, right? Yeah. I was talking to a friend anecdotally just last week who knew someone who had purchased a gun and then immediately used it tragically to end their own life. And it's stuff like that where you hope that with just a little bit of a waiting period, someone who's that angry or depressed or whatever the issue is will not be in that situation. I think that the biggest thing I've heard from people who consider themselves responsible gun owners is just kind of the arbitrariness of a 10 bullet limit, right? If you go to a store and you want a magazine for your handgun, like 15 rounds is a pretty common number. Mm-hmm. They can get 6 rounds. You get a lot of different numbers, right? So just kind of choosing a line and saying, if you've got 8 bullets, safe. 9 bullets, no way you could do wrong. 10 bullets, that's insane. I mean, it's just a number that they picked out of a hat. And I don't think there's much science suggesting
Well, actually, Zane, you're right with the number. But what's so sad to hear is why they were like, okay, that's enough time for someone to take down a school shooter. That's enough time for someone who's firing in a crowd. They're going to have to reload. And that's just gives whoever around enough time to bring them down. It's just so sad that we have to think this way. Look, it's going to happen. How can we lessen that impact? And this is I'm laughing just because I'm like, this is the best we got. Yeah. It's depressing.
It is really depressing. And I appreciate you bringing that point up because it is that is what is on a lot of people's minds who voted for it. And I'm sure the people who voted against it, at the same time are not wanting any of those horrible tragedies to continue.
But why do you need it too? I'm just like, what are we doing? There's not zombie hordes. You're fine. You know what I mean? If you're just like, I'm hunting, and it's just like, if you can't shoot that shit with 10 shots, go home. Yeah. Practice. What are you gonna do? But seriously, I can't. What are we doing here? Oh, whatever. Well, Zane, thank you so much for bringing us that headline. Let's take a quick break here, and when we come back, more headlines of the week.
CityCast Portland is brought to you by D'Amour Law Group. Let's face it, sometimes bad stuff happens. A serious injury, a catastrophic accident, or even a wrongful death. It can turn your world upside down. When it does, you deserve unwavering support from a dedicated team. Yep, you need a lawyer. D'Amour Law Group has over 30 years of experience protecting the rights of Oregonians. Their team of skilled attorneys, led by distinguished trial attorney Tom D'Amour, will work tirelessly to make sure your voice is heard and your rights are protected. Here's what one of his clients said. Tom fights for his clients from the first day they meet him through the last day of trial. If you or a loved one needs help holding those responsible for your injuries accountable, contact D'Amour Law Group at 503-222-6333 or visit d'amourlaw.com to schedule a free consultation. They are committed to fighting for the justice and compensation you deserve right here in Portland.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
All right, John, what caught your eye this week?
What caught my eye was good news for Portland Street Response. This is off some great reporting by Lillian Mongo-Hughes at the Oregonian. So Portland Street Response is the program that deploys teams to sort of help assist in non-life-threatening mental or behavioral health crises. The idea is that we don't want to send the police to every single time that there's a mental health issue in the city. We created this program in 2021. And it's sort of had a rocky run of it over the last several years. Its future has been in doubt. It was initially sort of housed in the fire department, which was an odd partnership. The program went through a number of leadership changes, and then when Commissioner Rene Gonzalez oversaw the Fire Bureau, he sort of argued against expanding it, calling it, quote, a shiny object program. There's questions about whether it would continue to be funded. This is all while the public and a lot of other officials have said this is a really great program that's doing really great work. Keith Wilson, now the mayor, during his campaign had talked about strengthening the program, and he made his first big move on that last week. He announced an immediate expansion of Portland Street Response and their role. So here's some of the changes that are going to happen. They're going to allow Portland Street Response to respond alongside traditional first responders like police, fire, AMR. Before it was sort of an either or thing, but now the police can like call in a PSR team if they need. It also expands where they can respond. Before they were only really allowed to respond to incidents that happened outside. The mayor said, like, no, they can now respond inside of public places like businesses and government buildings. And it also authorizes transport directly to shelters and treatment centers and day use facilities, et cetera, for people who need it. There isn't an immediate impact on the budget of Portland Street Response with all of these additional responsibilities, which is complicated. I'm sure we'll get into it, but like it is a big sign of support from city leadership that like this is important. This is something that we want to continue to see growing in the city. So yeah, what do you guys think?
I thought it was really interesting how this change came about, right? This was Mayor Keith Wilson, Electric Keith, coming in and saying, I'm making these changes as the city's chief executive. And while that might seem normal for the mayor to say something like that, what makes it interesting is that, right, we haven't had this form of government for very long. And what exactly the new legislative role of the city council versus the executive role of the mayor is going to be has been sort of up in the air and being defined by these initial office holders, right? So, you know, you might notice that if you read Lillian's article, the mayor is not committing any new money to the program. He's expanding what they can do in the areas they can operate. But if you wanted to actually, you know, hire more staff and increase the budget, he would basically have to go hat in hand to the city council and say, please, right? Now, this is something that our current city council would probably support, even given the budget crunch they're facing. But if you read between the lines, I see this as Mayor Wilson trying to say, hey, this is something I'm allowed to do as the chief executive and kind of fight for his role in the city government.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, Zane, basically the power that he has is he's able to make these administrative tweaks and changes to city programs without council approval. And so when this came out, I was like, cool, great. This is what we wanted. This is what the program was supposed to be from the very beginning. But there were actually some city council members that were upset that they weren't involved, which I found interesting because like there were quotes from Councilman Steve Novick who was just like, great. This is wonderful. Like, we don't have to worry about this. But then there were people in the committee for safety, like Angelita Murillo, who was more upset about it. I think they're afraid of, hey, this is too soon without the proper budget. And I think that's their concern. So it still has to come back. They still have to work it out in council. But the directive is it's happening.
And to that point, Claudia, there was earlier this week a meeting of the City Council Community Public Safety Committee, which Angelita is a part of, Steve Novick is a part of, as well as a couple other counselors. And they started like poking holes in some of these details. Something that I thought was really interesting that came up was Councilman Canal was like, so like, is there a budget impact here? Are response times going to go up? Like what actually happens? And the representatives from the city were like, well, actually, like labor partners could go back into bargaining and we might need to go through that before it's implemented. Also, training on these new policies needs to happen before it's implemented. So even though the mayor is able to come out and say, effective immediately, this is happening, it's not actually immediately happening. It's not like these changes are going to affect tomorrow and we could see more roadblocks in the way before this actually really starts to happen.
Buzzkill.
I know, right?
Yeah, well, it makes sense. It's like, there's executive orders and then there's the details of creating that. And I think we've seen that on the national level. All these executive orders that half of them go nowhere because it's just like, well, that's physically impossible, sir. So I think we're probably a little stuck between one of those? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And one other thing that came out of that meeting that I thought was really interesting was they presented a roadmap to like actually expanding this to a 24/7 program. Right now, it operates from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. To get to 24 hours a day, they put out a 2-year roadmap with the numbers of how the budget would need to expand from $7.4 million up to like $10.6 million. So about $3 million more to make it 24 hours a day, which now that the city is looking at a $93 million budget gap, we'll see what needs to happen to get there and how quick it's going to happen.
It's so sad that I'm just like, it's just $3 million, guys. It's just $3 million.
Yeah.
You know? In the grand scheme of city budgets, it's like, it's a little penny.
How much could a 24/7 street response cost?
How much can a banana cost?
How much does a banana
How
cost?
much can a banana cost? $10?
I mean, I was trying to think of what the correct Arrested Development response is. Like, there's always money in a Portland street response stand.
Well, John, thank you so much for bringing that up. I was so excited when I saw the headline, just because I haven't heard about PSR for a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
But let's take another break here, and when we return, more headlines of the week.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/credit card, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
Okay, so I'm actually starting a new segment this week that I'm calling The Audacity. And it's not going to happen every week. I'm not promising this is happening every week. Just when we get a good amount of headlines that elicit that response. And this week, oh yeah, we got a couple. I relied mostly on the Oregonian for reporting, though at least multiple local outlets took it because it was that audacious. So one is about some neighbors that are trying to shut down a Northeast Portland's elementary school playground dance party. And the other is about...
It doesn't sound real.
But it's true. And the other is about alleged retaliation for opening up Oswego Lake to the public, which is what I'm going to start off with. If you're new to town, the city of Lake Oswego, which is considered a pretty wealthy suburb just outside of Portland, has been fighting the courts for 12 plus years to keep their namesake lake, Oswego Lake, private and open to only like the 4,000 or so houses that surround it. They blocked access to pretty much everyone else, including people from Lake Oswego, even though it's kind of connected to their downtown area via a park, and that lake also feeds into the Willamette. Sorry, it's just so silly. So Todd Prager and Mark Kramer, these are the two kayakers who fought to make the lake public, celebrated the ruling this past Saturday afternoon by leading a public paddle around the lake, which, you know, must have really irked some people. So like maybe a dozen of these kayakers showed up, part of their Facebook group, which is, I love that whoever reported was just like, these people were of retirement age, just to show you, like, this was not a protest. This was just like, yay, we get to hang out in this freaking lake. So when Mark came back from his paddle, he found that his car had been scratched up. And I saw the pictures, you guys. It wasn't just like, it was brutal. Like, this shit was keyed so hard, they left dents So now Lake Oswego police, seeking more information from the public because supposedly they have a suspect. Someone left an anonymous note on Mark Kramer's car stating that they witnessed an older woman in a black Range Rover causing the damage. They even left the alleged suspect's license plate number. So the police are now asking for the writer of the note to come forward, but they're also asking for anyone who might have seen anything to also come forward. The audacity.
Like, AI could not have written this story better, you know?
We're not laughing at, like, poor Mark Kramer, but it's just like, are you kidding me?
What an asshole. Yeah, alternate title of segment. What an asshole.
To Mark Kramer, the guy?
No, the person who keyed the car.
Okay, I was just like, no. John, do you live in Lake Oswego? And this is how we find out that John did not move to Humboldt, but to Lake Oswego.
Oh, yeah. So Lake Oswego, breaking lake news, I got to go back in that bathtub. You're hearing this here for the first time, assuming you're listening to this when we're recording it. The Lake Corporation, right? The private company that has a bunch of shareholders consisting of the people who own property around Oswego Lake, they have appealed. So this is going to go to, surprise, surprise, the Oregon Appeals Court is going to hear a challenge to this public access ruling that just came out from the Clackamas County Circuit Court. So we'll see if there's a pause, we'll see if there's a stay, but this is not over even before we start.
Man. Well, okay, so before I introduce the other headline, I just want to remind everyone that our city enforces a lot of its ordinances on a complaint-only basis. And the ways of measuring compliance is rarely scientific or even reasonable. And this is why we keep getting into these kinds of scuffles, let's put it that way. For example, when multiple complaints from a single neighbor somehow successfully got Fogabo to shut down one of their locations, costing them thousands and thousands of dollars. And the main complaint by one single person was that they made that neighborhood smell like food. So in comes Julia Silverman from the Oregonian reporting how at least one dedicated, very grumpy neighbor was trying to single-handedly shut down a weekly Friday morning dance party that was originally started by the school after the pandemic, hoping to re-socialize these pandemic babies because they were seeing all these like 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds kind of regressing to toddler level social skills where they didn't interact during recess. They kind of just played next to each other, which is a sad, awkward visual, for little kids that aren't like playing pretend or whatever. And also that they're already dealing with social anxiety at that young age. So these dance parties, which started around 10:30 a.m. on Fridays and lasted a few rounds of recesses, they were like, this was the solution. And here's a quote from the article. Friday dance parties are beloved tradition at Sabin, complete with bubble machine, conga lines, staff members in head-to-toe sequins, and principal moonlighting as a DJ who takes requests. How freaking cute.
Very cute.
Can I say the next line?
Yes.
Not everyone is a dance party fan, though.
Oh my God. So repeated complaints from at least one perturbed neighbor telling the city that, hey, they're exceeding the city's 55 decibel limit in residential areas. So I'm just imagining all these little kids in a conga line and one dude with some kind of like DB gun sensor just standing right there. Just look, and they're like, 57. We're going to city council. And also, according to the article, it's not just the dance parties that was getting complaints. There have been like scattered complaints about other things that the school was just being too loud in general.
Complaints of the school being full of children? Is that?
Last September, the same neighbor, guys, took to next door, and he was just really upset that a jogathon that the school put on to raise money for classroom supplies and garden and education, community events, that kind of thing. He complained on Nextdoor, and let me quote here. On the Sabin Neighborhood's Nextdoor page that morning, one resident said the volume of the music that day, which began at 7:55 a.m., was intrusive and disrespectful to neighbors. That touched off a mini debate with another resident weighing in, thus, sometimes you have to ask yourself, do I sound like the Reverend from Footloose? So basically, this all led up to this neighbor taking it to city council. But I think he got enough feedback that he was just like, you know what? And this is what he said. He said, I withdrew my appeal when it became clear that it would require a 90-minute hearing from the city council, whose time I feel could be better spent on bigger issues. And also when I received multiple emails and social media messages from community members who, in thinking I wanted all music banned, cussed me out and frankly made me feel it wasn't worth it. So,
you know, I don't know if how many of the listeners have had the pleasure of scrolling through a Portland City Council agenda, but they have certain things in like small font. They have something in like that title. And it's in this really big font. So this guy, I'm sure he just like checked a box somewhere thinking like, I don't like the noise. And then his name is like literally in like 30-point font printed in the city council agenda, which like a lot of people read. This guy, I don't want to put him on blast because whatever, but he, at the same time, if you look at the photos that Oregonian photojournalist Beth Nakamura took, I mean, it's just, you could tell how much fun these kids are having. It looks like there's a kid who's staring at a bubble like it's the rapture, like he's never seen one before. There's like a conga line that just appears to be devolving into kind of a giant hug. I mean, it looks really, really fun. And, you know, if it's really that bad, I did check Zillow, and house prices are anywhere from over $500,000 to $1 million, you know, right across from Sabin Elementary. You know, it's very close in, very beautiful, nice Northeast Portland neighborhood. So if you really feel like you can't handle that music, I would be glad to take some of your homes off their hands at a significant discount. So just hit me up if you have any problems.
John's Wi-Fi just crapped out and he got booted off our recording session. And poor thing, I can see him in the chat and he's like, I'm here. But for some reason, it's not recording. But Zane, thank you so much for hanging out. I didn't realize you were on vacation. That's so sweet that you logged in for us. Thank you.
You want me to do John's impression of John's voice?
Look, what does John sound like?
I'm ready to conclude this podcast, Claudia.
That's not what he sounds like at all.
I don't know. I'm not an impressionist.
Oh, my God. Oh, John.
Can you hear me?
Know.
Am I here?
Yeah.
Whoa.
You're like cutting in and out.
I am marginally here. Sorry, guys. Bye. Bye. Thanks, Claudia.
Of course. Always a pleasure to host you. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Our production team this week included John Notarianni, Julia Fiaioni, Myron Kaplan, and Elizabeth Kama. Our Hey Portland newsletter editor is Rachel Monahan, and our host is me, Claudia Meza. Original music by Jenny Conley and Stephen Drizos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back Monday morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.